Modern humans are soft. We are separated from the brutal reality of survival by a thin veneer of grocery stores and delivery apps. But just 10,000 years ago, your entire existence depended on a handful of rocks. I decided to see if I could bridge that gap by recreating a functional Stone Age toolkit from scratch in just 2 hours. The plan was simple. I had 120 minutes to gather materials, knap stone, and build a cutting tool, a scraper, and a drill. If I failed, I would effectively be useless in the eyes of my ancestors. Let's start with the physics of stone. Most people think any rock will do, but that is a myth. You need cryptocrystalline rocks. Think flint, dichert, or obsidian. These stones have a conchoidal fracture pattern. That means they break like glass, creating edges sharper than a modern surgical scalpel. Obsidian, for instance, can produce an edge as thin as 3 nanometers. That is 10 times sharper than a steel razor blade. My first task was gathering raw material. I hit a dry creek bed behind my house. After 10 minutes of scouring, I found a piece of gray chert. It was unassuming, jagged, and covered in a layer of weathered cortex. This was my raw potential. The science of lithic reduction is ancient. It began roughly 2.6 million years ago with the Oldowan industry. Those early hominids weren't just throwing rocks. They were performing applied physics. They identified that hitting a rock at a specific angle, the platform angle, would drive a flake off the core. I sat down with a hard hammerstone made of quartzite. I needed to strike the chert at exactly 70 degrees. My first hit was a disaster. I shattered a corner of the rock, producing nothing but useless dust. My heart sank. I had 105 minutes left. I refocused. I visualized the bulb of percussion, the small swelling on the flake that tells you the force transferred correctly. I adjusted my grip. I struck again. A beautiful, translucent flake curled away from the core. It was sharp enough to slice through my denim jeans with zero pressure. I felt a sudden primal rush. I wasn't just hitting rocks. I was controlling entropy. By the 40-minute mark, I had a pile of sharp flakes. Now, I needed to make them useful. A loose flake is dangerous. It cuts your hand as easily as the target. I needed a handle. I found a sturdy piece of oak and used my sharpest chert flake as a draw knife to strip the bark. This is where the time pressure really hit. Processing wood is a labor of love. Every scrap of bark had to be removed to prevent rotting and to ensure a tight grip. My hands were cramping. I looked at the clock, 1 hour in. Halfway there, and I only had a glorified stick. I decided to create a hafted knife. I used some natural plant fiber cordage I had pre-made from stinging nettle stems. The process of making cordage is deceptively simple. You dry the stalks, crush them, and use the long fibers to twist together a rope. It is a technique that has been documented in archaeological sites dating back to the Upper Paleolithic. I placed my best chert blade into a split in the oak handle. I wrapped the cordage in a tight cross-hatching pattern. As I tightened the twine, the handle compressed around the stone. It felt solid. It felt like a tool that had been in a museum display case for centuries. I moved to the scraper. Scrapers were the workhorses of the Neolithic world. You needed them to process hides, strip fat from meat, and carve bone. To make one, you take a thicker flake and retouch the edge. You tap the edge with a smaller, softer hammerstone or even a piece of antler to create a series of tiny, consistent nicks. This strengthens the edge and turns it into a durable working surface. I spent 20 minutes refining the scraper edge. It was tedious. Each tiny strike risked shattering the whole flake. I was sweating. The physical exertion was minimal, but the mental focus was exhausting. This is the part of history books that they leave out. Surviving wasn't just about strength. It was about the patience of a saint. At 90 minutes, I had the knife and the scraper. I needed one more tool to complete the set. I chose a drill, or a borer. This is a narrow, pointed flake, usually triangular in cross-section. You use it to drill holes in shells, wood, or even bone for jewelry and weapon maintenance. I spent the final 30 minutes selecting a slender piece of jasper. I pressure-flaked the sides until it looked like a tiny, aggressive spearhead. I didn't have time to attach it to a bow drill, so I used my fingers to test it on a scrap piece of cedar. It drilled a hole in seconds. The efficiency was shocking. 2 hours had passed. I looked at the 3 items lying on the grass: a hafted knife, a hide scraper, and a drill. They didn't look like much, but they were the pinnacle of technology for 99% of human history. When I held the knife, I realized something profound. These tools are the reason we are here. They allowed us to process high-calorie marrow, to craft clothing that kept us alive in freezing temperatures, and to build the foundations of society. Before the wheel, before writing, before the steam engine, there was the edge. The results were shocking, not because I made masterpieces, but because I realized how quickly the brain adapts to ancestral skills. Within 2 hours, I stopped seeing a rock as a rock and started seeing it as a potential blade, a scraper, or a drill. My perception of the world shifted from objects to possibilities. We often think of the Stone Age as a time of struggle and ignorance. We imagine our ancestors as struggling to light a fire or catch a rabbit. But these tools prove otherwise. They were masters of material science. They understood fracture mechanics, the tensile strength of fibers, and the ergonomic geometry of their tools. We are not smarter than them. We are just lucky to be standing on the shoulders of giants who learned how to shape the world one flake at a time. If you took away the internet, the plastic, and the metal today, how many of us would survive? Not because we lack the physical strength, but because we have lost the ability to see the world as a toolbox. Nature is filled with everything you need to live. We just forgot how to look. Next time you walk past a riverbed, look down. That gray rock under your foot isn't just landscape. It is the history of your species. It is a knife waiting for a hand to shape it. We are living in an era of infinite convenience, but perhaps we have traded away a crucial part of our humanity in the process. We have forgotten that we are capable of making anything we need if only we take the time to learn the language of the materials around us. 2 hours was all it took for me to reconnect with that silent, stony legacy. Maybe it is time you tried it too.